Thanks for joining us today on our expert panel about consulting. I'm John. I'm our host from Next Degree, and I'm really excited to introduce you guys to some of our other clinicians and scientists in consulting who have offered to talk to us today to teach us about how to make that transition and what to expect. Before we get started, let's let everyone do a brief introduction. We'll start with Dr. Vat Patel, who in true consulting fashion is on his way to another engagement. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, hey everyone, my name is Vat Patel. I'm a board certified pediatrician who made the switch to consulting about a year and 3 months ago. I work at McKinsey. I live in Philadelphia. I'm out of the Philadelphia office, and in my free time, I enjoy rock climbing, traveling, and I'm actually headed to New Zealand next Tuesday for an extended vacation. So excited to be here and excited to enlighten and answer any questions that you guys have.
Yeah, thanks for being with us today. Next, we'll go to the other side of the Atlantic and speak with Adam.
Hi, everybody. My name is Adam, and I, up until a few weeks ago, worked at a strategy consulting firm, a boutique one that we focused on pharma and biotech clients exclusively. Before that, I did a master's of science in clinical neuroscience at the University of Oxford, and also a fan of rock climbing and long distance running and traveling as well. Not to go into New Zealand next week, unfortunately, but it's a great place to be.
Awesome. I'm jealous too. And finally, we'll go to Casey.
Hi, everyone. My name is Kleckner Charles. I go by KC. I'm a clinical physical therapist. Started out specializing mainly in cardiology and cardiothoracic surgery patients. I was doing that for about 6+ years before going to business school. And from business school, I went to a consulting firm called Simon Kucher and Partners, where they specialize mainly in pricing and market access strategy. And they have very, very large life sciences wing. I have since done consulting for a few years now, and I've moved over to software consulting on that side as a CSM. Personally, I live in Boston right now. Just like everyone else, I enjoy traveling. I enjoy playing golf and tennis. And I'm very pumped to be here to help inform our healthcare colleagues.
Thank you so much. As you can tell, we have a wide range of not only clinical backgrounds, but academic backgrounds. Traditionally, people think of consulting as a post-MBA career. But as this goes to show you, there are consultants that come from academia, there are consultants that come from clinical care, and consultants who make the transition through business school or other business-related programs. Now, consulting is this big, ambiguous word, right? And there are so many different layers of it that are really important to understand that we'll dig into today to help understand if, one, consulting is a job you could love, and two, what your fit might be. I mean, things like boutique consulting, in-house consulting, Big Four, MBB, or even subclassifications of consulting like strategy, management, or freelance are all different types that align with both your passions, both personal and professional, and the work and the support that you can provide to help small and large organizations touch more patients. Now, what's fascinating, though, is much like product, consulting is a challenging transition. And the reason for that is there's lots of words and lots of tools, which we'll call lexicon and frameworks, that aren't really familiar to us in clinical care. But what's really interesting is that the underlying strategy of using this thinking and analysis, such as in the clinical world, differential diagnosis, provides a great foundation for you to use this skill in consulting once you learn those tools and frameworks. And with that being said, I'll stop talking and we'll start learning from our experts who have donated their time to us today. So first, I want to start with Casey. Consulting is this big nebulous word. And I'd just like to start off to see your views on what are the expectations of a consultant in your firm coming from a clinical background on day one?
Yeah, absolutely. So the expectations of a clinical provider or someone with a scientific background coming into consulting is, I'll be honest, the expectation is that you are a subject matter expert. We don't have the leisure of, being a young college student straight out of school and graduating and not really knowing too much. The expectations that you know a lot about your field and how that would translate into whichever deliverables or projects that you're on. And beyond that, you can find other ways to become like very helpful with helping with proposals and whatnot. But on day one, you're seen as the subject matter expert in that space. And depending on the size of your firm, what will likely happen is a lot of partners or senior directors are going to ping you to get your feedback on specific business cases or questions that they might have. So by day one, which is not a scary thing because we know our field very well, but you are the subject matter expert in your field and be expected to be asked a bunch of questions.
Absolutely. And that's such an important thing to monitor on many fronts, but especially, small firms versus big firms. Just like clinics and hospitals, small firms are going to function very differently from very, very big firms like Simon Kucher or like McKinsey. Another interesting point to think about, which I want to throw to Adam, is that transition he made from academia directly into consulting. Adam, from your perspective, what were the expectations of a consultant in your firm from day one?
So everyone that joined my old firm, we all, or most of us, had like a scientific background, a scientific interest. We weren't subject matter experts per se, but that sort of scientific background demonstrated our passion for the field, for the industry. So expectations, not so much on sort of the scientific, sort of your expertise, your interest. I came from clinical psychology, clinical neuroscience. I also have an interest in that field, in that space. And if sort of project comes along, so that touches those areas, I will raise my hand. I want to take those projects, but it's not necessarily me getting assigned those projects just because of my background, but it's more sort of demonstrated interest. So also the business acumen, the business project we were doing, that was very much learning on the job rather than expectations coming into a job, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. Learning on the job is such a huge part of it, right? And one thing you'll hear a lot across the consulting world is this thought of, brains for hire. And really what that means is consultants have a lot of mental horsepower, right? You've got to not only understand your field, be able to learn quickly and adapt to the needs of clients and projects and these crazy schedules that are thrown to you. And with that, I'd like to ask the same question to that, working at McKinsey, huge international firm, especially coming out of, clinical care as a pediatrician. What were the expectations of you on day one?
Yeah, I think the big expectations were really to just bring my clinical perspective to every engagement and every conversation that we had with clients, whether that was directly related or indirectly related, just being able to have an opinion and share my clinical background, because despite what we think about, like how little we may know about business, it's anything that we know. It's a lot more than somebody who's coming straight out of their MBA, who's never worked in healthcare or has that kind of background. So it was nice and refreshing to hear like a lot of my McKinsey colleagues were really valuing the perspective I brought in, despite me not having like a formal business education.
Absolutely. I think imposter syndrome is something that everyone really struggles with. But I think sometimes we forget that, healthcare, especially in the US, is a business as well. And we may use different words, but understanding the flow of patients, the customer journey, referrals, reimbursement, things like that are things that we're steeped in day one in clinical care, right? And it's not so much that we don't have the knowledge for that. We need to learn the transitions and the translations, which is much easier than learning clinical neuroscience or microbiology. I'll tell you that. But I do think that consulting is, a great career to consider for clinicians. And I'd like to throw it back to Casey. What, from your opinion, especially going through business school and making that transition out across multiple firms, what, in your view, are the benefits of consulting for someone coming from a clinical or scientific background?
In my opinion, I think everyone that wants to do business should go through the route of consulting. You learn so much so quickly. Like they make the joke, like 1 year in consulting is like 3 years, in the industry, and that's not any sort of hyperbole. because you might be on 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 projects at one time, all doing different things. And, consulting is not, it's just not easy. Like you work long hours, but it's all worth it. You learn so much so quickly. And that was, and like, that is my, that's how I believe in consulting. It's very valuable as a clinical provider because you come in with so much information, so much knowledge. And I want to backtrack slightly. When I mentioned that the expectation is that you're a subject matter expert, I think that said it much better. Like the things as clinical providers that are so basic to us, like business people just don't understand. Like, for example, why they'll ask me, why can't you stand a patient directly up from lying flat after a heart surgery? Well, it's to us, that's so basic, but to them, they just don't know. So in order to have that clinical background and then take all that and utilize it into a business field, you're going to learn so much in business. And then how our clinical background, intertwines into business, it's a beautiful thing. And I highly recommend it for someone that's looking to get into business, starting in consulting, because you learn so much about so much very quickly.
Absolutely. And I actually have a question in the chat right now that I'm going to throw to Adam. The question is, how tough is it to learn the business side? Do all clinician consultants or scientific consultants need to learn business, or will clinical or scientific background be enough? Now, I think Casey, going through business school, maybe had a little bit of start on that, right? But I think Adam, especially coming straight from academia, I'd love your views on this question.
I guess it sort of depends what level you're entering at, but in a very junior analyst or junior consultant role, it's not so much about the business savviness per se. I only speak from my experience, and the parts that my old firm didn't really expect me to sort of have a fully grasp of business sort of questions per se, but more of the structured thinking and sort of how to come up with relatively useful recommendations. And these are things that sort of conduct an analysis of huge amount of data and condense it to small pieces and informative small recommendations. That's sort of the key things. And business, knowing business is such a wishy-washy word. It can be everything and it can be nothing. So I think a lot of clinicians and academics have a lot of the toolkits that are needed in a consulting role without understanding it. But sort of understanding where to pick certain skill sets from and sort of present it in a logical way. It's something that is expected when you start, but obviously you can hone those skills throughout your career, your journey. Not to say that an MBA is, that could also be very useful to have that formative training in business questions, but you're expected to learn a lot on the job rather than sort of come in with a perfect understanding of business, whatever that is.
Absolutely. And I think this is a really, really important point to kind of repeat. Clinical care is very flat, especially when you are first graduating out of school. And as a clinician, you're kind of a generalist, right? Whether you're working across multiple diseases, indications, whatnot. But even the flattest consulting structures will have more hierarchy than the clinic. If you come in as a junior consultant, right, you're obviously not going to be asked to lead the entire project. You're going to have your senior consultants, you're going to have your engagement managers, you're going to have your senior partners who are doing more of that broad work. Rather, you'll be given a very narrow focus, like Casey said, as a subject matter expert, with a sprinkling of other things to work on top of that to grow horizontally and to learn, right? And this is really, really important because this hierarchy is something that's foreign to us, in clinical and the scientific world. But you're going to be expected to do different things at different levels. At the junior level, you're going to be expected to work on more narrow projects, whereas up at the partner level, you're actually going to be doing more strategic thinking and sales, right, to get new projects. So especially relative to where you enter, your expectations are different for learning business and applying business. We have another question from the chat that I'm going to wrap into this next question for that. My question for you is, what were the challenges you encountered switching from healthcare to consulting? And as a second point, what skills from medicine did you feel were transferable to consulting?
Yeah, I think on the first point, the big challenge I faced going from medicine to consulting, or going from like clinical care to consulting, was just the the feelings of self doubt, like the idea that I can't do this job because I don't have training, or I'm not a consultant, I'm not somebody who has expertise in business. You know, all throughout our clinical training, you're kind of told that you're not really an expert until you become an expert. And so it's very uncomfortable to me, this idea that like I would join this company, start being a consultant, and immediately have this kind of hold this expertise that clients kind of expect from us. And I think that was initially pretty uncomfortable for me and a little bit difficult for me to grasp. But as soon as I realized like it's it's more of like a counseling relationship, a coaching relationship, where very similar to patient care. And I'll jump into the second question here. Once I realized how similar it was, it made it a little bit more comfortable and a little bit easier to like understand how the consulting process happens and how we work with clients. And so, um, perfect segue into the second question, which is, you know, what were the transferable skills? I think honestly, everything that I did in medicine is incredibly transferable. I just finished up a training, like a training that we have for consultants after their first year at the firm. And the entire time they were talking about empathy, they were talking about active listening, asking questions, asking open-ended questions. And for me, it was a very easy training, like something I've been trained to do as a doctor, which is, you know, listen to the patient, don't talk down to them, don't give them a space to like really truly talk about what their issues are and dig deeper to see like, is their first problem that they came into the clinic with the one that's actually bothering them at the end of the day. Um, and so when I did when I was doing my role playing, everyone was so surprised. Or, oh my gosh, like you're so good at this. Like, how are you good at like talking to clients or people? Like, I was a doctor. Like I knew how to talk to patients. I cared for them for the last 3 years, like in residency. And yeah, I had practice doing that. And so while it initially didn't feel like a superpower, it's kind of a superpower to be able to talk to patients and to have that like caring mindset. And so to anyone thinking about switching, or anyone who's been in a clinical setting, like everything that you learn is so valuable in business, because in business people have to kind of intentionally train to do those things that we already have coming from a clinical background.
That's so true. I remember when I was going through consulting, the transferable skill that I really leaned on was bedside manner, just like as Matt said, because I mean, your engagement managers on your team and your project leads on your client side are people too, right? And don't get me wrong, there is a learning curve for like things like Excel and PowerPoint, but that can be learned, right? But this ability to speak to multiple different types of people and have hard conversations all at once is something that we do day in and day out, even in training, not even in when you get to clinical care and you're carrying a full caseload, seeing a patient every 10 or 15 minutes, right? So I would have to agree as well. Like this bedside manner and being able to have honest conversations is important, because, you know, why do patients come to see clinicians? Because they're afraid. They don't know how their pain started. They don't know how long it's going to take to get better. They don't know how to get better. So they come to you for advice. And consulting is very similar. Companies have problems. They don't have the time or the expertise to solve them, and they're worried about them. So they come to consulting firms to add extra bandwidth to help work through these problems, right? And navigating that transition, I think, with that bedside manner and having that strength is really, really valuable. Now we're getting a bunch more questions in the chat. And I'm going to go to our next question to Adam. So Adam, the question I have for you today was, how did you enter consulting? You know, how did you find your consulting job, especially trying to juggle all of your research and trying to juggle all your classwork and all those things all at once?
Yeah, so just to start with, like, sort of my consulting journey really started during my year in Oxford. I came to Oxford thinking I would do a PhD. I didn't even know what McKinsey or BCG was. I never heard of these names before. And I think throughout the year, I realized that doing a PhD, if I would do that, this would probably be because I didn't know anything else out there. And doing my research, I sort of realized like this energy that came from it. It was more like a net negative like energy output, really. So really, so sort of speak with my friends in my program or in different like science programs, science masters, who I knew weren't going down the PhD route, and asking them what they were going to do, going into industry. What is industry? And a lot of them decided to go into strategy consulting, and specifically life science and strategy consulting. And now I realized there was a place where I can stay in the industry I enjoy. Like, I enjoy these questions, I enjoy the space, but I can sort of apply my skill set in different questions and answering other questions and learn new tools to use and etc. So that was sort of in the end of my master's year, and started applying to some firms during that time. I remember got to one first round of interviews, and I prepared my case the day before. In case, for people who don't know, like that's a very integral part of consulting interviews, a case interview, and it's very expected, and you shouldn't go in like I did, just not knowing about it. So obviously it didn't make it to second round, but it was really good learning for me because I enjoyed sort of this question they were asking, and I knew that it was something I could train myself, and applied for other roles, other consulting firms, and then managed to hack the case prep, and a few months later I landed a job that I left just a few weeks ago. But it was it's a process of going from this mindset of, okay, I'm going to be a researcher, I'm going to do my PhD, to what's else out there. But a big chunk of that, and I have a lot of amazing friends to thank for having a lot of these interesting conversations with people who are already further ahead in their thinking than I was. And I think that's throughout everyone's career, like speaking with people who are a few steps ahead and asking them like how, like the basic questions. So like what's out there, what can you do, what's fun, like these basic questions are really important to ask. And that's what made my sort of mind shift from PhD to consulting. So it takes a lot of work, and you have to really make sure that you can crack the case. But it's so trainable, and there's so many resources out there that it's definitely achievable wherever stage you are. If you're an undergrad studying whatever to researcher, clinician with years of experience, it's definitely something that you can train and work on. So yeah, that's my story.
Absolutely. And I just want to focus on this word really quick: case. A case is a structured problem that you're given in an interview that you're expected to work your way through. It's very similar to kind of like a clinical case study you may have in school or in an interview on the clinical side. But I just, Adam's glazing over this, but he put a lot of work into this, and he's actually created a guide for us on how to crack the case, as well as tons of free case examples on our blog. So if you go to medium.com/nextdegree, you'll see an article about consulting and cases. Definitely check it out. Adam wrote it for us, and there's tons of free resources in there. Cases can be learned. They're fun, strategic thinking problems. The main thing is volume. You've got to do a bunch of them and get used to the flow, but definitely check it out. He's laid out that guide for us on our blog. So, really wanted to highlight that because that's really helpful.
Yeah. And there's one quick thing on the case is the good thing with the case is that it's very similar to the job you will then be doing when you get the job. So doing the case prep and trying to prepare for the interviews, also a way for yourself to see, is this something I'll enjoy doing? So it's not only to pass the interview, it's also for yourself to see, is this something that I get energy from? Is that the question I want to be asking? The difference is when you actually get to the job, you do cases, more complex cases, but you do it in a team. It's a team effort. So obviously it's preparing for a case for an interview, you do it usually by yourself or with people around you, but at the end of the day, so you go into the interview, you gonna try to solve this case. But even in an interview, I'm gonna go back, even in the interview, you do have an interviewer that could add some flavor to the case. And that's also something very important in the interview down the line, is using sort of the interviewee as your partner in a way where you can actually sort of work stuff out together. So it's a really good sort of interview format for you to not only get the job, but also understand what you're getting into and see if you like it or not.
Absolutely. Now, seeing a bunch of questions as circulating around the to MBA or not to MBA question for consulting. So I'll split these up between Casey and Vat. Casey got his MBA. Vat went straight from practice to consulting. So Casey, I'll start with you. What was your path to consulting? And do you really need an MBA, or is 8+ years of clinical experience enough to have a shot? Circling around, what is the profile that consulting firms are looking for?
Great question. So, my path to very high level, my path to consulting was very nonlinear. The reason why I got my MBA in the beginning is I wanted to do hospital administration. But then in my last semester, realized that hospital administration is not my passion, not where I wanted to be. And so, right before, I feel like I needed my MBA. Not because I didn't think I could learn a lot of business on the job. I needed my MBA from a credibility standpoint. As a physical therapist coming into consulting, very non-traditional, very different if I were like an MD like that or had my nursing degree. Those are more commonly seen. But as a physical therapist, I needed to build credibility on the outside to let these individuals or let these hiring managers know I have what it takes to be able to do consulting, look at my, MBA. Did I need it per se? No. Was it incredibly helpful to get to where I am? Absolutely. From a business standpoint, I'm seeing a lot of things for the second, third, fourth time, especially when it comes to like corporate finance, like, accounting stuff was super helpful. But in terms of the softer business skills, that is all I learned on the job. But in terms of the stuff that you learn in consulting, the MBA was essentially support for me, demonstrating that I have the ability to learn these things on the job. So I didn't need it, but I wanted it for myself to build outside looking in to me credibility.
I think that's such a great point. And I want to echo and just pause on that moment about hiring managers, right? Because people don't know what they don't know, right? So most hiring managers obviously aren't clinicians, right? But everybody has a story about a doctor or a surgeon or a nurse. But things like physical therapy, occupational therapy, speech language pathology are probably less fluent in the rest of society, right? So building in that external proof point of an MBA in consideration of who's going to be looking at your resume can definitely be helpful, because it gives them something else to anchor on, right? Because they'll know what an MBA is working in the business world, but they may not know what a PT or an OCS or a DOT is and things like that, right? Now, I'm going to ask the same question to that. What was your path to consulting? And in addition, would you say that learning business knowledge on the job is analogous to how you learned clinical knowledge during your training time?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. So my path was and I'll tell you kind of a quick story, but I did my undergrad at UVA actually with John. Took 2 years off to try to kind of find my path to see if medicine was truly the right thing that I wanted to do. And I think that was like my first instance that, medicine may not be my like lifelong passion, the career that I want to stick with for the rest of my life. I decided to go to medical school right afterwards because I wasn't able to find like anything that I wanted to do more. Did my 4 years of medical school at University of Virginia, and then did my residency down at UT Southwestern in Dallas for 3 years. And it was during residency that I realized I needed to change and I needed to make a shift, or else I felt like I was going to be stuck. For a moment, I thought about getting my MBA, and it's a deeply personal decision. There's pros and cons of getting it, pros and cons of not getting it. But for me, I felt confident in what John you described just now as of learning on the job, learning the business, quote unquote, uh, of on the job training. My fiance is in business school right now at Wharton, and like some of the things that she's learning, I'm like, wow, like this would actually be super helpful for me if I was formally like in a class studying it, learning it. Um, and so it's different, right? Like I learn on the job, maybe don't get to the depth that I want to, but am able to like to get to a point where I'm able to help other individuals and feel comfortable with the information. And I think it's interesting in that, you know, there's this question of should I get my MBA, should I not get my MBA? There's really no right or wrong decision. It's just going in with like an intention of what do I want to get out of my MBA versus what do I want to do in consulting without getting my MBA. And just having like a growth mindset overall will be helpful for you no matter what you end up deciding.
Absolutely. I'm guilty. I did an MBA. I went into consulting as well, but I'll be the first to tell you that MBA is super expensive and it's a path, right? It doesn't have to be your path. You actually get to decide ultimately, right? So, you know, all our experts have so much different experience and I'm so happy we're sharing it with you guys, right? But take these as data points, like make the best decision that's right for you and your family, your career, and know that you have this option as a deep subject matter expert in healthcare that you can either use in consulting or another job or another career, right? But you already have one spike, right? To add another spike in business, you can do that formally or informally if it suits your goals, right? And so I want to transition to another question here, which I think is super fascinating. And I'll give this one to Adam. You know, how is the impact from your job felt differently in clinical or academia versus consulting?
Yeah. So like my academic career is, you know, it's a master's and a PhD or postdoc. So yeah, I've had 2 published papers, but that's about it. In terms of sort of the turnaround of, you know, publishing papers versus, you know, giving recommendations is quite quick in consulting versus academia. So that's definitely like a key point. It's the sort of the turnaround of your actions and into, you know, results or, you know, whatever output. So that's one big point. Second point, I would say, I mean, this is just from like undergraduate, master's studying. I think it's more isolated rather than in consulting. In consulting, everything we do is iterated a million times, and it gives a sense of, you know, teamwork and everything. You're producing things as a collective rather than individual, and that's something really resonated with me. And another thing that made me sort of go into industry before, you know, embarking on PhD. This idea of, you know, doing everything as a you know, like with iteration, with feedback, consistent feedback. You know, writing an essay in at uni, you maybe have one brief look at it of a prof if you're lucky. Otherwise, elsewhere, you know, a lot of stuff is not even looked at before you hand it in. Whereas, you know, you would never hand something to a client with like at least like I don't know how many 10s, 15, 20 eyes of it, and whatever slide deck you're doing, it's gonna be look at something completely, you know, something else in the end because it took so many iterations. But personally, that really suits me because, you know, having that sort of constant back and forth is, I think that's how you create a really good product. And I mean, there's obviously some, you know, collaboration in academia. I'm not gonna, you know, say it's not, but at least from you know, from a large part of it is, you know, I think it's more sort of individual and more not, you know, a bit more lonely, for lack of a better word, but it's not lonely in the consulting world. It's very much a team sport.
Absolutely. Just because a win feels different doesn't mean it's not a win. You know, it's very, very gratifying to get that instant change in that patient because of this perfect differential diagnosis or perfect treatment very quickly, right? But scaling these changes in these huge organizations that can impact millions of lives doesn't happen overnight. but there are wins there, right? They just feel differently, and they're presented in a way that you may not have experienced before. So definitely search for those wins and know that they're there, but don't be afraid that they'll feel a little different, right? It's a different game, and that's okay. So we got a bunch of really great questions in the chat right now. I'm going to give the next two to Casey. I'm going to wrap them together. For the first one, did you apply for any positions before you received your MBA? And if so, did you notice a clear change in how people reacted to you before versus after adding letters to your name? In terms of this unawareness of what a DPT is, especially outside of clinic. And in addition, do you have any horror stories from consulting? Did you like your job? Did you not like your job? Kind of putting those all together.
There was definitely a big difference. Yeah. So I was applying to jobs beforehand, and it's just tough, being a physical therapist. Like if you talk to a layperson that has no family that are PTs, they'll say a physical therapist is like essentially an athletic trainer or someone that goes to like help with like hip pain or like back pain. There's a massive stretch. Or there's like cardiothoracic physical therapists. There's geriatric. There's orthopedic. There's such a huge range, but their assumption is in their mind a PT, which there's nothing wrong with. Obviously, nothing wrong. Like a PT outpatient clinic. Churning out patients and that's it. So that is what their mind is. They don't understand. They don't see the problem solving, all the work that we have to go into in order to get our degrees and effectively treat patients. That's one. The moment I got my MBA and the letters to my name, I feel like the floodgates opened and everyone was like reaching out to me and calling me like, do you want to work here? Well, everyone besides MBB was calling me because that was tough. But yeah, there's definitely a huge difference. A very good way to bypass that is to form a connection. Create a warm lead for yourself, have a connection, and communicate with someone that can vouch for you. Like find a consultant, communicate with them, let them understand what your skills are, how they can transfer into business, and then let them vouch for you. And then that in of itself will give you more opportunity instead of someone saying DPT, skip. Instead of saying DPT skip, and like, okay, DPT knows this person, and this person believes they have the chops to work here. Let me dive a little bit deeper. So you don't need your MBA per se. It's super helpful, makes it much easier. But a good way to bypass that is create warm leads for yourself. So the second question is some horror stories. I mean, it's consulting. My experiences are very, very different than someone else's, and I loved every second of it. But consulting is what you want to make it to be. Like I was hungry for knowledge. I wanted to learn everything. I volunteered for every proposal going through. I volunteered for lots of projects. Horror stories, there was I think maybe for 6 or 8 weeks straight, and I was at least 1 to 2 days where I'd be up for 24 hours, just get slides done. A partner says, I want this by, end of day. Well, I'd make sure my end of day didn't end till 6:30 a.m. the following day, so then they could have all the slides, with all the comments and whatnot. So, but I had put that onto myself. I had many colleagues that were able to be 9 to 5, 8 to 6, because they chose that for themselves. So you make it what you want to. I wanted to learn quickly. I wanted to learn a lot. It was hell on earth for me for the 3+ years I was in consulting, but I wanted that. So you can make it however you want it. I want to learn it quickly. I have other colleagues that were a little bit slower, but I would still highly recommend it to everyone.
I think those are such great points. Two things I want to highlight is you're hearing a lot of acronyms, right? MBA, Master of Business Administration. MBB is also an acronym used for 3 of the biggest consulting firms. That would be McKinsey, Bain, and Boston Consulting Group. You also hear other things like Big Four, which is another set of consultancies. Each ones have different sizes, different flavors. In general, MBB are probably the most international and the most well-known, which leads into this like next two questions I want to give to that from the chat. And those questions are, generally speaking, how hard is it to get into McKinsey? Pretty hard. And also, what does the career growth path within the firm look like? Like, where are the ranks? Where are the titles? How does that look like?
Yeah, absolutely. So, John, you cut to the chase. It's pretty hard to get into McKinsey as an associate, but I would caveat that with it's not any harder than the work that we did to get into like medical school or any other part of your life where it requires like deep effort, deep patience, and preparation. And so it's tough, but it's also not the hardest thing in the world. I remember going through the interview process and had to do a lot of casing to kind of get practice. But when I think back to it, it's like, oh, okay, like I studied harder for my step 1 exam, and like I did 4 years of medical school. Like I can pretty much do anything. Like I hope. And so just going into that kind of a mindset, which was helpful to be able to tackle this like daunting firm, applying to like McKinsey, applying to BCG, like Bain. Like a lot of people kind of think that it's like impossible to crack, or there's like a special sauce to get in. They really just want to see unique backgrounds, people who have like really cool experiences, who aren't just drones and like doing the same thing over and over again, but are curious about the world and try to get involved in different things. And so I applied only with my resume. Like I just submitted my resume. I didn't do any networking, didn't do anything like that, and got an interview like somehow. But I think it was because of like the unique background and the experiences I had that I was able to articulate onto my resume. Other people network, and other people get referrals, and so there's different paths. Again, like there's no clear-cut way to do it. It's just this is like a data point for you guys to see, like it's possible to do to get into McKinsey in many different ways. And so and then going off the second point, John, can you remind me what the second one was? Sorry, there's some commotion around me and lost my train of thought there.
Yeah, no problem. The second question is, what does the career growth in McKinsey look like? Different ranks, associate, engagement manager, et cetera. What does that look like?
Yeah, absolutely. So the growth at McKinsey is pretty accelerated. You like start off, if you're coming straight out of undergrad, you're a business analyst. After a few years, you become an associate, which is like 1 or 2 years, and then as an associate, that's like the typical MBA, like experienced hire position. You spend anywhere from 1 to 2.5 years in that role before getting to the next stage, which is engagement manager. Engagement manager really like takes care of the entire team, reports up to the partners, senior partners, the clients, and also like delegates work and ensures all the work that the associate and the BA are doing is like moving forward. I'll take a step back and just like associates kind of do like the bulk of the work, and then as you go higher, it's more about like ensuring the work is getting done. After engagement manager, you do that for about 2-ish years. You get promoted to associate partner. As an associate partner, you have multiple different clients that you care for. So you're working with multiple different teams at times, and have multiple like engagement managers who are like reporting to you. You're helping problem solve, and in that role, you're there for about 3 to 4 years before you get elected to partner. As a partner, you own client relationships, so you're the one who is going to clients, seeing if there's a value proposition for like them working with McKinsey, and then like offer a potential like solution through our work. You do that for 5 years or so. You like really have to make a name for yourself before you get elected to senior partner. And then senior partner, you're kind of like that's like the highest position that you can have at most of these firms. And when you're there, you have like a really long lasting relationship with clients. You're you're seen as like a client coach and client counselor, the one that like CEOs go to when they have like any question or problem on their mind. And yeah, I think that's like the end. And then following that, you can become like, partner emeritus and like all these other strange titles, but we won't go into that right now.
I think this is such an important point. Thanks for laying out the org tree for us at McKinsey. That's something that I've heard a lot speaking to clinicians is like, or even scientists is, after clinical director, then what? Like after lead author, then what? Right. And I think it's part of the appeal of consulting is like, it's very structured. Like, what your next step's going to be, the metrics that you need to get there. If you don't meet them, you're out. Right. But at least, and having that clarity on what that next step is and what your expectations are to reach there is something that's very, very different from kind of the flat structure of clinical care where you go in and you may be doing the same role for 20 years. Right. So I think that's really important to highlight. That is a benefit and a difference from healthcare is that upward mobility is very clear. Whether you get to it or not, though, it won't just be handed to you, though. You definitely got to earn it. I'm seeing this really interesting question that I want to pose to Adam. In your role, are you responsible for all scientific or clinical questions since you're the subject matter expert, or is there some sort of infrastructure in place to support these questions from clients? And what did your day-to-day look like in consulting?
The first question I can answer quite quickly. I wasn't really employed as a subject matter expert. As I said, most of my colleagues were just science graduates. So we weren't sort of asked specifically on, whatever background we had. And the second question on my day-to-day. So it really depends on firm. So I've experienced from one small boutique consulting firm. There was only about 9 or 10 consultants. But our teams were more or less one junior consultant, or we call them associate consultant. There was usually one sort of mid-level consultant and one senior consultant or manager who was sort of a project lead, and a partner. This was sort of a standard formula. Sometimes it was less, sometimes it's only one person and the partner, sometimes it was two people and a partner. So you had your small group, and usually we were only one was on one project at a time at my old firm, but you had that focus. You had Mondays, usually went through sort of planning your week, client calls, sort of slide decks had to be done, some Excel modeling, and sort of have that back and forth usually with the project manager, quite regular project updates, and then maybe once a week or so you have a bigger meeting with the partner. But my old firm was really good in that it was quite flat. So we had we met with partners multiple times a week. We all sat in one room. So it was no sort of you never see the partner, which I know in some other bigger firms you don't really have that partner engagement or even client engagement, especially in a junior role. So in my old firm and a lot of the smaller boutique consulting firms I know are quite similar, and they're more flatter in structure. So also if someone considering consulting, so it's quite a good way of differentiating different firms. So one of them is, as I said, the team size, how big the company is, and like how the team structure is, and whether they do sort of generalist consulting or like industry specific. So my experience comes from a small firm that's industry specific, and that sort of that's gonna influence what I'm doing on a day-to-day basis, who I interact with, and sort of what tasks I can do. I was, for example, leading interviews in my first year of a junior consultant. I don't think I would have led interview. I don't think I would have spoken with the clients in my first year in a bigger firm. So you get different things from different firms. I think that's a really good way, to understand when you're sort of deciding on where to go.
I think this is such a good point. When I think about, my transition out of clinical training into getting my first job, there's always that thought of, I need to go work for this big hospital or big pro sports team or something like that. But then as you go through your career, you realize that sometimes a smaller organization fits you better personally than a larger organization, and vice versa, right? And going into consulting is no different. There's value in both small boutique firms and large international firms like MBB, Big Four, etc. So don't put yourself into this box saying you have to go work for MBB or you have to go work for Big Four or even have to be a life sciences consultant or things like that, right? Just like clinical care, there are different size and specialties of consulting firms that may be right for you now or later, right? You may go into the orthopedic world as a physical therapist, for example, but then merge into the neuro world because you realized that you worked with football players and thought concussions were really interesting, but neuro was not your passion straight out of school. It's okay. You don't put yourself into this box saying, I have to go work for these small firms or these big firms. Understand what the right fit for you is and talk to people who've done both to make that decision for you. Now, I want to throw this next question to Casey. It's actually going to be 2 questions. I think this is really fascinating. Was there any feeling of guilt or unease in leaving clinical work by exploring social impact in a different way? You're on mute.
This is the motif of our lives right now. So I'll be honest. No, I had it was maybe I would have at first, but like I feel like the point of having these these conversations for transparency, but the money helped, it was very nice to transition from PT into consulting because I was making a lot more money. However, the work that you're doing, the overall impact is over a larger scope, but of a lesser degree. So like I'll just have a very quick example. As a physical therapist, I really enjoyed the ability to positively impact the lives of like 60 to 70 patients a week. That was awesome. So, because I was like very, I was trying not to use too many consulting words, but I was very like downstream, like I was treating patients. Like that's very on the downstream side of things. Is the endpoint is the patient. Now, what I'm doing is I'm on the further upstream side to where I'm informing a lot of the strategy and decisions that a lot of these manufacturers or these pharma companies are doing in order to get access to patients. So it was very cool where I saw a commercial of one of the clients that I had that I suggested that they should have like they should essentially like possibly I'll give them multiple options obviously, but possibly forego the initial price, the overall price of certain products to have a larger footprint of patients that they treat. And I saw their commercial on TV during a Super Bowl, and it was very cool, so the impact that you have is a lot less direct and not as measurable, but it's much larger on a larger scope. So the impact is there, but it's just much more broad. So that definitely helped with the guilt for sure.
Yeah, that's very cool and very important, right? Being able to, hey, if you change the price of this medicine, right, and then you make it a little less, you can reach 1 million more patients. That's a huge impact. Right? How many years would you have to treat to reach 1 million patients or 1 million more patients, right? So again, a little more abstract, but definitely the impact is there. And that's a really cool story. Now we're running short on time. So I'm going to leave this last question for that. The first part of the question is the same. Were there any feelings of guilt or unease by leaving clinical work? And secondly, what are a few transferable skills for someone with no experience in consulting that helped during an interview that were helpful to mention?
Yeah, I think To the first question about guilt, I think there was a little bit of guilt. Not guilt in like leaving medicine, but guilt in taking more of like a selfish approach to my career. As going into medicine, it's almost like a selfless kind of thing, especially within pediatrics, where I'm not making as much as like a surgeon or whatever, and there really isn't like prestige with being a pediatrician per se. And so, I did it because I wanted to take care of children, and I enjoyed working with children, and I just had the most empathy for that patient population. But it wasn't like satisfying for me from a career perspective of like the growth I wanted to do, and then my ultimate mission of like scaling my impact at a community or a society level. And so there was like a little bit of guilt in terms of like, now I have to start thinking about myself rather than like just thinking about the patients and how what I do helps the patient. And I've gotten some feedback about like, yes, everyone has to think about themselves a little bit in terms of how they develop as leaders in order for them to ultimately help that larger population, or make that bigger impact that we're all kind of seeking in the business world. And so I would say like I've come to terms with it. It was tough, but I've learned how my impact or my like involvement as a medical leader within this firm helps the client like achieve their goals. And so like, yeah, don't let that limit you, unless like the reason you're doing what you're doing is the patient care part of it. Like if that's like what gives you ultimate joy, and that's the only thing that gives you ultimate joy, you may have a tough time kind of transitioning outside of that. The second point, the transferable skills to mention in an interview, I think it's just the stories that you have. Nobody wants to hear about like the details of the stories. It's more just like, tell me about what you were thinking during that interview or during that patient interaction. And so like an example I would give is like, I had a patient whose mother was a little bit frustrated with the care that she was receiving. I took the chance to like listen to her, ask some thoughtful questions, and that like helped her open up to like telling me what her concern was for her child and why she was like demanding certain things. Obviously with a little bit more detail and a little bit more tact than that, but I think sharing that shows that you're a good listener. You know how to talk to clients, how to ask clients for data, how to work with clients so that clients work with you and aren't just frustrated that there's another consultant coming in telling me what to do, telling me how to run my business, but rather like how can we work with and partner with them to ultimately help the health of their company. And so yeah, there's transferable skills all around. It's just take the mindset of like what do I do well and how can I get that across, rather than like trying to find what are consulting firms looking for per se. Yeah, I think that's like the way to think about that question when you're going into the interview.
It sounds so simple, but it's so true. Like so many people are not great at listening and understanding what's really causing this complaint. Like in the physical therapy world, someone's coming to you with shoulder pain, not because it hurts, but because they're afraid they won't be able to work. It's so obvious to us as clinicians, right? Because we deal with hundreds of these buried fears and questions every day. But this really is a huge strength that other industries aren't really privy to, because you build it by doing, not by reading, right? So I know it sounds simple, but I just agree with the panelists here, this bedside manner and being able to actively listen and use that to identify true problems and sources of stress and solve these problems or deliver them. It's really just, it's the game we play in clinical care with different words and different tools. And with that, I think we're at time. I just want to thank you guys so much for sharing your experiences with us. It's weird times all across the world right now, especially that about to go to New Zealand. Thank you so much. Thank you guys for listening in. And if you have any questions, let us know. Check us out at nextdegree.org and go build that career you love. Thank you.
Thanks, John.
Thanks, John.